Well, we've been talking about apocalyptic things as relates to Scripture. I would tell you that the term apocalyptic is really not a biblical term. It's kind of related very much so to the way we look at things that maybe are based on what things sound like when you're reading the book of Revelation. And, of course, okay, up there? Oh, okay. Okay. Right, got it. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. How do we use this term just in everyday language? Apocalyptic. Forget about the Bible. How do it's commonly heard when people talk about tornadoes and bad fires and all that. Go ahead, Ian.
I was just going to say, something that's cataclysmic, disaster, or akin to just like major earth shaking.
Yeah. And to some people, then it signals the end of the world. And of course, that's because when they look at the book of Revelation, that's what they see there. That's the main idea that they seem to get from that. When you get to the area that Robert hasn't gotten to yet, we're going to get those 7 churches of Asia, we're going to get them straightened out, let me tell you. We're still working on it, aren't we, Robert? Yeah. Well, okay. Well, here, come here, Robert, let me. All right, so it is a term, though, that also carries with it in literature some of the ideas that are very significant and important to us as biblical people. Here's the definition. It comes from the word apocalypsis, is part of the given title of the final book of the New Testament. And that's what? What's the last book? Thank you. The revelation from the word noted of Jesus Christ in Revelation 1:1. So could someone read Revelation 1:1? Let's see. Carrie, could you read Revelation 1:1, please?
The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his bondservants the things which must soon take place, and he sent and communicated it by his angel to his bondservant John.
Okay. So in the title of the book, as it's put there in Revelation 1:1, it tells us in the definition of this term that what that term means, apocalypsis, is to unveil something, to uncover it. Hence, what the book of Revelation is a revelation or a revealing of things to come. And so when you think about the book of Revelation, generally speaking, it doesn't have anything to do so much with the coming of Christ. That's already been dealt with, and that's going behind the individuals who are living at this time, but they're looking forward to things. And so they're being revealed. And so that's what it means. And it carries with it the idea of being hidden. But things need to be revealed if the Lord wants them to be revealed to us. So it's important for us to understand that what we're really talking about here, the revelation, is something is being revealed that people didn't know or they didn't fully understand. OT apocalyptic writing presents an unveiling of the things pertaining to the coming kingdom of the Lord. And I notice here with you, in some way, it's a form of prophecy. So when a prophecy is made, generally speaking, someone will look at the prophecy and will say, I wonder what that's talking about. I wonder what that's getting to. And of course, the whole idea is to do what? To reveal something that's going to happen. So that's what that is. That's really what the word is talking about. So if someone, and we'll look at some of these examples here, that when an Old Testament prophecy is looked at, then someone will use it. We could use one in a lesson here, but when an inspired person got it, he would explain the context of what it meant. Usually it had something to do with, here's what we think of when we think of Jesus. And this now, when you look at that particular phrase in the Old Testament, then you'll know that it's talking about Jesus. Sometimes it's not always clear to us, is it? You know, you'll kind of look at a passage, you'll say, yeah, well, that seems like it can be talking about Christ. We're going to look at a situation like that. But let's just look at some of these prophecies that are given there, which also have sort of apocalyptic leanings. In other words, something bad's going to be happening, or something great's going to be happening. So, in Ezekiel 37:24, we have looked at this passage before. I don't expect you to really remember it, but still it says, my servant David will be king over them, and they will all have one shepherd, and they will walk in my ordinances and keep my statutes and observe them. They will live on the land that I gave to Jacob my servant, in which your fathers lived, and they will live on it, and they and their sons sons forever, and David my servant will be their prince forever. All right, so it's talking about David, and it's talking about what I call the forever kingdom. Up until the time of Jesus, most of the world kingdoms did what? They began, they were destroyed, another kingdom would begin. All right, now, so David, himself, he was a king, and he lasted for a while, and then he passed it on to his son Solomon. But he didn't last forever. So when you look at this, and you also read about what? That's related not necessarily to any promise related to Jesus. And that is, when we think about Jesus and what he brought to the world, what would you think of it? Just at its core. Think about the crucifixion. Think about the resurrection. What did he bring? Forgiveness of sins, okay? And if you want to participate in that, then you recognize he's the king and you follow his leadership. All right, so it says in verse 26, I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it will be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will place them and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in their midst forever. My dwelling place also will be with them, and I will be their guard, and they will be my people. And the nations will know that I am the Lord who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forever. So it seems like there's two phases of this, isn't there? There is the sense of David's coming back, and then it also sounds like there is more of a physical aspect to this. And when we think of what the coming kingdom is, it's not a kingdom that you necessarily see. It's not something that's one of those things that you think of as you think of a normal kingdom, but it is a kingdom that is powerful and it lasts forever. All right, so we look at that, though, and most people, when they look at that, because they realize there's something about Jesus and David, and what's that? What's that? There's a connection, and what would the connection be, Jessica?
That Jesus was from the lineage of David, but then also Jesus symbiotically would be the next David.
Okay, so he's a descendant of David, right? Okay, so anyway, so we know that whatever's happening there somehow relates to David, but of course, we found in some of these reconstructions, if you will, of the nation, they were back in their land, and with the idea of optimism, looking forward to the fact that we can stay there forever. And that was always true. With what? When they obey God, that they'll stay there. But they don't do it. They didn't ever do it for a long period of time. But anyway, so you look at something like this, and it may not come out as perfectly clear. So put your thinking caps on here. But you see a connection between David and Jesus. You get a connection between Jesus coming and establishing a kingdom. But yet there are certain things that I won't say they conflict or they contradict, but you're kind of wondering about, well, what is that actually talking about? And usually when it's something that's prophetic like this, we don't get everything, all of the puzzle put together, but we can get the idea of what it actually presents. And so when we go on over to Daniel chapter 2, which is a passage that most of us are familiar with, as with the idea of, okay, there's going to be this coming kingdom. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 44, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself will endure forever. So that's the forever nature of the kingdom of the Lord. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. This is David interpreting a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. So what it does, this identifies what? What do most of us learn when we look at this Daniel 2 passage about the relationship with the kingdom and when the kingdom's going to come? Okay, you remember how it balances out? There's four different kingdoms. Okay? 4 kingdoms. This is the final one, and again, I'm not going to go into any great detail, but we understand that. What is that kingdom? The Roman kingdom. All right, so if we're looking for this eternal, what? Eternal kingdom, we find out when it's going to begin. When does it have its starting point? And it's going to be when? I can't, you have to speak up. Okay, during the Roman emperors and emperorship and its ruling. So what we do, this identifies when the eternal kingdom will be made known by the Son of God when he is crucified and resurrected. So this is a prophecy, is it not? It doesn't look like something that is exciting or more stirring than anything else. It's apocalyptic, that kind of thing. Doesn't sound like it. But what does it do? It has in common what we're trying to understand about the general idea of what apocalyptic writing is. It's something that is going to reveal something that has been hidden. And so people are probably wondering, when was this going to happen? And sometimes people will just start coming up with their own ideas about when it is. But we learn from that. It's revealed to us. It's unveiled to us because we put together things and say, this is consistent with what's going on. Hosea chapter 2, verse 19 is rather significant because there's something else that's hidden. In fact, it's actually talked about as being hidden by Paul in one of his letters. But here in Hosea chapter 2, verse 19, one of the late prophets, he says, I will betroth you to me forever. Yes, I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, in loving kindness and in compassion. He's talking about, okay, if you'll repent and you'll be faithful, I'll take care of you. He's talking about Israel there. And I will betroth you to me in faithfulness. Then you will know the Lord. It will come about in that day that I will respond, declares the Lord, and I will respond to the heavens, and they will respond to the earth, and the earth will respond to the grain, and the new wine, and the oil, and they will respond to Jezreel. And I will sow her for myself in the land. I will also have compassion on who had not obtained compassion. And I will say to those who are not my people, you are my people. And they will say, well, you are my God. All right, now you're reading this if you're Jewish, and you're studying the law, and you come to this Hosea passage. It has a lot of good things to say about the relationship that God has with the people. But what is added here that can become very, very confusing to some people, particularly of that nation? What's that? There's other people in this thing. And I put down here in my silly way, what does this mean? Well, we thought we were your only people. Is that the way Israel generally felt? They always felt that way. But there's more to it than that. And so, Hosea chapter 2, verse 19, it opens the door to understanding this. I will say, you are not my people, and you are my people. And they will say, well, you are my God. So there's a conversion there from Gentiles. They go to the family of God, and they do it through the blood of Christ. All right, now, so when you think about what Paul came to do, well, this is just a part of it. But tell me some of the things that you think of when you think of what Paul came to do. I say it was to explain what had once been a mystery. Now, I don't have to, write a song about that and make it up. That's exactly what's said, is that he came to help the learning of what something was a mystery to the people. Even though God knows what he's doing or what he did, but yet he didn't always come right out and say it. So here, you're sitting here and you're thinking about this as a Jew who's always in your own mind, we are the people of God and we're special and God only cares about us. And then they throw in this thing about what? Somebody else is going to be his people. And that was pretty tricky for him. Okay, so just tell me about what you think Paul came to do, generally. Think about things that he did that if you were going to write a biography of Paul, what would you say? Go ahead, Carol.
Well, being a Jew himself,
Yeah.
how difficult it was going to be for his people to accept the Gentiles as part of the kingdom.
Sure.
And so he was trying to help them understand they're not going to lose out just because the Gentiles will now be part of this kingdom.
Yeah.
This is what God intended from the beginning.
Yeah. And he's kind of, when he writes about it in Romans, it's kind of after the fact. He's explaining to them because it's an ongoing conflict with them. They're thinking that God has pushed them out. And so they have to understand that it was never God's plan for you to only be the people of God. It would be other people who would be brought to him through what? His son and what he did. Okay? Somebody add something else to that. Things that he did. Go ahead, Clay.
Paul was very zealous no matter what side he was on.
Yeah.
Before he was converted, very zealous. After he was converted, very zealous in everything that he did. And he had his whole heart in everything that he was preaching.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's something he reveals a part of the character of God, if you will, that once you are committed to me, then you're going to follow me. Go ahead, Robert.
Well, one of Paul's chief tasks that we see more than almost any other apostle was Christ gave him the responsibility to preach and teach to the Gentile nations. The practical reason being Paul had a greater access to the Roman Empire than pretty much any of the other apostles because of his political standing. But that was his chief goal by the Holy Spirit, was to go and preach and teach to the Gentiles. And at that time had, of the apostles, probably the most emphasis and success in bringing Gentiles into the fold of God.
Yeah. So what might have sometimes these things seem to have reasoning behind them that we can understand, but why do you suppose he was selected to do that by God? Carol kind of touched on it. Anybody else want to add anything?
He's a man of both worlds. He was both Gentile and Jewish.
He was born. It wasn't that he didn't have Jewish parents, but he had his citizenship amongst the Gentiles and then or certainly amongst the Israelites. So why, just a second, Jessica, why do you think, and this is, again, it might be kind of a mystery to us. It may not ever be completely revealed, and that is, well, why did he call Paul? Well, it's because whatever he was doing, he was always devoted to it, like Clay said. But still, it kind of leaves open a little bit of reason. But I think another thing we think of is what really pushed him down the road as far as being a child of God. What happened on the road to Damascus? So, go ahead, Jessica.
And with Paul's background, since he was so well versed in the scriptures,
Right.
after coming to know Christ, he was able to go back and have an understanding, and he could probably see the plan.
Yeah.
He probably was able to understand what God had intended, because he was able to have that understanding and go back and relook at the scriptures. And then also he was one of the main apostles who was readily able to accept the Gentiles, because even Peter had issues. Paul really didn't
Yeah.
have any issues accepting the Gentiles. He was a Pharisee.
Right.
So you think of all the ones, he would have even more difficulty than Peter.
You would think that would be the case, that if somebody's going to struggle with going to the Gentiles, it would be Paul, because, number one, he starts out wanting to put at least his Jewish brethren in jail for following Christ. But again, he has this experience on the road to Damascus, and what does Paul think about himself as far as his relationship with God and the sense of his deserving to be in a good relationship with God? That's how he saw himself. So that may have been, okay, maybe he didn't like Gentiles all that much. Certainly, historically, you'd kind of think that would be the case. But even though they were thought of as the sinners, the Gentiles, maybe Paul is thinking, well, who am I to say who's a sinner? And so that kind of opens up the gate for him to say, I can go talk to those people. I know what it's like to be separated from God. Most of the people like Peter, they didn't really understand all that very well, because they thought of themselves as being part of God's family. All right, now, so what was Paul's mission? Well, he had a lot of things to do, and that was to travel Europe and establish churches in that area. It was to explain what had once been a mystery. How does that make the words of Hosea apocalyptic? Apocalyptic. Okay, let's.
Paul is unveiling
Yeah.
the truth.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Larry. That's just exactly what it is. Look at verse 1 of chapter 3. Paul is talking to whom? Specifically, the whole church, but he's looking at the Gentiles, because there is this sense that, and if you read the book of Ephesians and other places, and Romans, where they weren't getting along all that well, and the Jews looked down upon the Gentiles, and the Gentiles didn't have a problem looking down on the Jews. But they understood that was where salvation was, where it was going to be. So he said, for this reason I, Paul, the prisoner of Christ, for the sake of you Gentiles, if indeed you have heard of the stewardship of God's grace, which was given to me for you, that by revelation there was made known to me the mystery, as I wrote before in brief. By referring to this, when you read, you can understand my insight into the mystery of Christ. Now, why was it mysterious, this message? I mean, God obviously knew all about it, right? Well, I mean, again, look at it this way. The Jews are trying to figure out how it is God accepts Gentiles. In Romans chapter 9 through chapter 11, Paul addresses that and essentially says, look, just because he has accepted the Gentiles doesn't mean that he's rejected you. And they have to get over that in some way. And that's how the church in Rome, if they were going to be united, they were going to have to overcome that. So he's there to make known to me the mystery, as he says, from God. And I wrote before in brief, by referring to this, when you read, you can understand my insight into the mystery of Christ. Now, to a great extent, this whole idea of Gentiles being included in the family of God was a mystery to Paul and his brethren. And so, God determines that there's going to come a time when what's going to have to happen is I'm going to clarify this to them. Now, the Jews didn't handle this very well. They challenged Paul all through Romans 9 to chapter 11. And he understands, he counters some of their questions that he's asking that maybe they haven't directly asked him at this point in time. But they're very upset that the Gentiles are equals to us. Now, what happened when Cornelius was baptized into Christ? How did that fit into the system?
There was a miracle to show the Jews that were there that this was God's purpose.
Okay.
It wasn't an accident. The Holy Spirit coming on the house.
It should have made it clear, okay? But did it make it clear to the people in Jerusalem when they find about what happens when these Gentiles, when somebody like Cornelius, even though he was a great guy? I know we've always looked at this and said, well, why did he pick Cornelius? Well, it's because he was such a good guy. Well, yeah, he was, but I can tell you, it didn't matter to a lot of Jews whether he was a good guy or not. So what happened? Go ahead, Kerry.
The fact that Cornelius was chosen, not only was his character, but he was a Roman centurion. He was a Gentile of Gentiles.
Yeah.
In a Jewish land.
Yeah, and he tried to get along with the Jews. He did a lot of good things for them, but still, it would have been a negative, that he was what he was. But he was a noble person. There's no question about it. But that still didn't stop his new brethren, the Jews, from saying, you people need to be circumcised. And so they eventually declared that, I guess you can understand that Jews, you guys go ahead and circumcise yourselves if that's what you want. It's not something that's expected of you. But certainly, at the very least, don't put it on Gentiles that they have to do that. Okay. Any other comments or anything? Yes, go ahead, Carol.
Well, I was just going to mention that prejudice is a very, very strong attitude to get past. And this was generational prejudice that these Jews
Oh, yeah, to say the least.
generations, they had seen the Gentiles as barbarians, heathens, less than they were.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't see it as equal in any way.
Yeah. Even when they were making a mess of things.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a powerful thing, and it'll kind of make you blind to your own shortcomings, as we've discussed. Okay, so to be specific, what was it? That the Gentiles are fellow heirs and fellow members of the body and fellow partakers of the promise in Christ Jesus through the gospel. Okay, so here are these passages, like in Hosea and a few others in Isaiah, that mentioned, in a somewhat positive nature, people across the world. And again, I suspect that the Jews, by the way they responded to someone like Cornelius, is that they just really couldn't make sense of that. I mean, he really is going to say they're just like we are? And so there it is. It's something that's maybe a struggle, but what happens? It needs to be revealed to them. And so, who did the revealing? Of course, Paul, with the help, of course, of the Holy Spirit. All right, so that's, if you'll at least try to follow my approach to this and trying to understand what apocalyptic writing is that it's generally talking about something that is hidden, like the fulfillment of a prophecy, or just a general understanding of the Scripture. Now, you remember when we started talking about the temple a little bit and the rebuilding of the temple as revealed by Ezekiel, and we started talking about how or why is this a physical temple or is it some other kind of temple? Now, so what were some of the reasons that were given for it not necessarily being a physical temple? What happened in the temple, by the way? The carrying out of the law of Moses. And that's where sacrifices were offered. That's where the high priest had his headquarters. So that right there, for me, it causes me to think, well, maybe it's possible it doesn't really have to do with a physical temple. And so that's what we did. We looked at a few passages. And I say, remember from last week how we saw Paul and Peter's identifying any doubts about a coming rebuilt temple. Now, again, it's one of these things where you're going to have to accept, and I'm going to have to accept, what actually is said. And I'm not going to look at it and say, yeah, well, it doesn't say not to build a temple. Well, I know what I can read and what I can see. And then the powerful evidence in revealing to me that maybe in Ezekiel and his promise of a temple is not something that I should be looking for as a physical thing. And we looked at a few passages that you will find there in 1 Corinthians 3. So, some keys to identifying apocalyptic language. Let's go back to 1 Corinthians 3:16. Pick one and raise your hand and read it. Go ahead, Micah. What do you want? Okay, go ahead. And then somebody get ready for Ephesians 2. 1 Corinthians 3:16. And notice the terminology. Go ahead.
Do you know that you are a temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you?
Okay. So the emphasis as far as the temple, and we talked about this last week, that when we're talking about the temple, we're not talking about a physical building, we're talking about believers who make up this temple. And of course, then in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 21, go ahead, Robert.
In whom the whole building being fitted together is growing into a holy temple in the Lord.
Okay, so how does that sound like the temple is not a building? Robert? Okay, so it's going to be growing. Okay, and it specifically talks about the people are making up the building. All right? Okay, and then 1 Peter 2, verse 4 and 5. Go ahead, Mark.
Coming to him as to a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious. You also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ.
All right, so what we've done is we just tried to figure out, how are we supposed to look at this temple that's mentioned in Ezekiel? How are we supposed to behold it as we look at the relationship that the people of Israel had with God? And then, of course, ultimately, the whole world is now going to what? Have a relationship with Him. All right. So when we look to what is apocalyptic language, it's most often symbolic. We've talked about that a bit, haven't we? We talked about it. The other term we use is figurative. It's usually that way, but it's not always. Now, because when we think of it, You know, we think about at the beginning of Ezekiel, what seems to be symbolic there in that vision that Ezekiel experiences? Did it seem like describing an episode of the Andy Griffith Show or something like that? No, I don't think so. Go ahead, Robert.
Well, it's very particular and very detailed of measurements and cubits and sizes. And we're going to measure out every inch of the temple and divide out the land of the holy city and so on and so forth. So it presents itself as a very physical place, but then when you kind of look at it, it doesn't seem like anything that has any semblance of really recognition and reality. But it seems to be something physical because we're using physical terms to describe it, such as length, width,
Sure.
height,
Right.
dividing, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so what about that vision that Ezekiel experienced at the beginning of the book? Okay. Was it more like science fiction than it was the Andy Griffith Show? Yeah, okay. I'm just trying to put this in a way that I can understand it and you can understand it. I mean, and so what's the, without going back and reading it all right now, what did it cause us to think about God when we saw what that vision was that he had? Go ahead, Carol.
You're talking about the one at the beginning of Ezekiel?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Well, he saw the glory of God departing the temple in that vision,
Yeah.
which was happening because of the destruction that was going to come
Okay.
upon the nation.
Sure.
Okay, then in the one in 40,
Oh, no, don't go there yet. Okay. I just want to know about the general reaction that people would have toward that. And then Carol can talk about the other aspect of it in a second, in chapter 40. I mean, how did it impress Ezekiel that he goes, hey, this is pretty cool, you know? It's terrifying, exactly right. And so we learned something about God. We learned something about his fierceness and his power. And that was all learned in the, if you would, the symbolism of that, what did you call him, Carol, again? The one that left? The glory of God. You see the glory of God and you have a perception about it that tells you this is something to be respected, be in awe. Go ahead, Carol. Do you want to say something about the chapter 40?
Chapter 40, we see the glory of God returning in the vision to the temple, which is a restorative message to the people.
Right.
That
Okay.
once the 70 years is over, not only will they be restored as a
Right.
nation, but when Christ comes,
Yeah.
his kingdom will be.
Now, it doesn't specifically say that, you know, but because we get this stuff kind of revealed to us and we put it together, it makes very, very reasonable sense. And that's the thing that I'm talking about here, is that some of these things, like over in the book of Revelation, we may never completely understand what those are all about. But they're there for a reason, and they're there to show what? The power of God, the power of evil that wants to come up against God. And we may not know exactly, we may not be able to agree on, you know, who's involved here specifically, but we get the principle. All right, so we look at what's apocalyptic. Let's go back to okay, number one, we've learned that it's often symbolic, but it's not symbolic in the same way. I mean, what about the prophecy from Hosea? Would you say that is very figurative and very symbolic? In what way, Robert?
Well, it's talking about brides and how the people will become a bride unto God, or betrothed, rather. There's a lot of things that don't make a lot of sense if you take it one for one as literal.
Yeah, but I think generally when you look at it, it's not real flashy, other than, what you raised there, and that's exactly right. It's sometimes stored in visions. In other words, the prophet will often explain what came in the vision. Well, Nebuchadnezzar had the dream, and who interpreted the dream? Daniel. So there was a vision there that was revealing something about, okay, Nebuchadnezzar is thinking of himself as being the all-powerful one. Right? And then, and he had been schooled on that already, but even though at a certain point in time, he's saying, hey, I believe in the Father these Jews call God. So, it's one of those things where what is happening here, when we look at apocalyptic literature, it's usually talking about something that may happen. Sometimes it's very straightforward, and sometimes it's very broad, and we really can't always know what it's talking about. It's almost always predictive in nature. That's the prophecy. Some of the literature that I've read is that, generally speaking, when you think about apocalyptic language, you should also understand that generally it's like prophecy. Because what's the prophet doing? He's revealing. So that's what's happening there with it, generally speaking. So, as we read in the book of Revelation, it is often presented as being otherworldly. That's just my way of looking at it. Okay? Some of it's not. Some of it's pretty easy to understand, but some of it's very difficult. People have been differing for years over what the items actually mean. And so it'll probably be debated for a long time, I suspect. Sometimes that can make explaining details very, very difficult. All right, so as we bring it to a close, apocalyptic writing is something that allows something which has been hidden to be what? To be revealed. That's the gist of it. It's revealing a truth. Sometimes they're pretty easy to understand. Sometimes they're not. We maybe aren't going to be able to really understand what's being talked about in the book of Revelation or somewhere in the book of Daniel or Zechariah or something like that. But that's what it's about. And so, even though people generally think of it as terrible things that are going to happen before the world ends, that's not exactly what it means. It may have that effect, but it's not apocalyptic because a lot of people get killed. It's apocalyptic biblically because it's something that's been hidden, like a prophecy, not fulfilled or not understood, or just anything that was about to happen that would be in the instructive hands of the Father in heaven. Okay? All right. That's it. And we have one more class in this quarter. I was just sure this was the last one, I'm sounding like Richard, aren't I? No, there's just that, this April, it's an extra long one. So we'll have one more week, and we'll look a little bit more into some of the things that Carol raised about the temple and what it represented to the people, what it should have, and what it can represent to us. Okay? Any other comments or questions? Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
I'm kind of confused. You know this class goes through May?
Yeah, I know that, yeah. What would I do without you, Carrie? Yes, I know. In fact, that's what we had to explain to Richard. Yeah. When you weren't here. We did it all by ourselves. Yeah, well, thanks. All right. Mitch, would you close this, please, with a word of prayer?